Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's training. We're just going to wait a few more seconds and let people come in before we get started. Alrighty, it is 3:01. I think we can get started with intros and before we know it, I think more people will be joining in and then we'll be diving into the content. So, hello everyone. This is the Serving Clients with Criminal Records training. It is training number 4 of the Implicit Bias training series that we are doing in partnership with San Mateo County. If this is where you need to be, then you are in the right room. If not, send us a chat and we can help you out there, I guess. But yeah, thank you so much for attending this training. I know it's after lunch, but we really appreciate everybody in the room coming in and being a part of this conversation. So let's get started. All right, before we begin, some tech stuff. Wanted to make sure that everybody knows we are recording this training. So after the training, I usually send out the recording with the slides so that everybody has access to the materials. The chat box is not recorded though. So whatever comments or questions you're putting in the chat, those will not be recorded. There is an option to have a live transcript that's available somewhere in the bottom toolbar of your options. And when people are coming in, we ask that you are please stay muted because you want to make sure that we don't have a whole lot of background noise being a distraction for everybody else. If you need to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to come off mute and just talk. We are more than happy to have your engagement and participation. If you have any questions during the training, or if you're coming, up with any kind of technical issues, you can send us a chat. My colleague Vanessa is also in the Zoom room with us, so please send her a chat and she can help you out. I do also want to note that we will be pausing periodically to like make sure that people have questions. We're holding time for that in the middle of the training, so rest assured we'll get to them if you have any. We also have the option of closed captioning available, and you can access that by clicking on more at the bottom, and then it will give you an option, I think, that says something like show subtitles. So that's how you can activate that. Okay, so wanted to do a really quick introduction and give you a feel for who we are. So my name is Sarah Ahmed. I am here representing Homebase, which is a nonprofit committed to building community capacity to end homelessness. And within Homebase, we have the Criminal Legal System Initiative, which is an initiative that really chooses to focus on cross-sector workshops and fostering partnerships to really speak to the intersection of the criminal legal system and homelessness and how these two phenomena interact and the impacts that they have on people's lives. So this training is developed by Homebase and within Homebase, the CLSI initiative. And with you here today, you have me, Sarah Ahmed, the staff attorney, and from Homebase, who is going to be your primary presenter. And also here, I have my colleague, Vanessa Spinazzola, who is the directing attorney and also our CLSI team lead. So she is a great wealth of information, and I'm excited for you all to ask your questions and get them answered by her. Before we begin, just wanted to set a few community guidelines. These are things that we thought would be a good idea to show you all and get your feedback and see if you have any other suggestions. So once again, we ask that you please stay on mute while you're not speaking, but feel free to come off mute if you need to. We ask that you be as present as you would be in person. I know we all have really busy schedules. We have a lot of back-to-back meetings, so it's hard, but I think it's really helpful that you are here in this room and being present and being an active listener can really add to the conversations that we're hoping to have here today. We ask that you maintain confidentiality of any personal information that is shared here today. We ask that you raise your hand before you speak or just pop your question in the chat if you need to. Take breaks as you need them. You know, a lot of the conversations here are going to be based on some really heavy topics, and people are really coming into the conversations with their own lived experiences and personal lives, and some of it can be really heavy. So take breaks as you need to. And I just wanted to let you all know that we do have a 5-minute break built into the training itself. Listen before you react. Be an active listener, and we would hope that most of you would stay on camera. It's just helpful to be able to see faces. It's nice to have that energy coming back at you while we're talking, and really helps to foster good conversation. But we understand if that is not possible today. And I wanted to hold some time for you all to see if you had any suggestions for community guidelines before we continue. Feel free to pop them in the chat or come off mute. Okay. I don't know if people are just typing or should give it a few more seconds, but I think I will keep going for the sake of time. But if you have something, put it in the chat and I'll be sure to read that and go forward. Okay, so let's get started with the agenda we have here for you all today. We are hoping to give an overview of the criminal legal system's basics and really understand why we need to know that to understand the different ways it impacts people's lives. We want to focus on the relationship between the criminal legal system and homelessness. We hope to have a conversation about what a criminal record can tell you, and more importantly, what it cannot tell you. After that, we will have a 5-minute break so that people can stand up, stretch their legs, take a water break, whatever they need to do. And when we come back, we will talk about strategies that can help to minimize housing barriers for people with past convictions. And then finally, we will open it up to a panel we have today of speakers, and we will ask them questions based on their own lived experiences and open it up to the audience for them to be able to also ask them questions. So that is the big picture agenda we have for you here today. And I want to transition from this to kind of the goals we have for the training, the learning goals that we're hoping everybody takes away from this training. So we're hoping that everybody gains familiarity with the criminal legal system, including the impacts of race. We're hoping that everybody understands the intersectional nature of housing, homelessness, race, and the criminal legal system. We hope that everybody can identify what a criminal record can and cannot tell you. And we hope that people can learn new ways to recognize and minimize housing barriers for people with past convictions. All right, so getting started with the criminal legal system and the impacts of race. So this is a really simple graphic that I think kind of gets to the overarching point that I'm hoping to make here, and that is that there's a lot of things that go into the criminal legal system from start to finish, from, a person getting arrested all the way out to reentry. There are a lot of different kind of phases or milestones that a person hits. And these are just some of them. These are kind of the big picture phases, I guess, that we would say. But I think it's so important to remember that each dot or each phase has so many micro steps built into that process too. And so it really is meant to show kind of the breadth of the system and how complicated it can be to navigate. And all these different dots are different places where the system can have really far-reaching and inequitable impacts on a person's life. We wanted to give this overview because when we talk about someone having a criminal legal involvement, we're talking about people being touched by the system at any of these points, not just being incarcerated or not just having a law enforcement interaction. And when we talk about why discussing criminal history is important, we want to focus on the exclusions that bar people from housing, right? And honestly, bar them from everything else. So there are two types of things that we would focus on. The first being collateral consequences, which are usually laws that bar people from things. They're usually regulations that limit people who are convicted of crimes from accessing employment, business, occupational licensing, the right to vote, education, public benefits, and a lot of other rights and opportunities. Depending on where you live, it can really impact a lot of the kind of societal systems that we're so used to. This is an intended consequence. This is required by law and required by regulation. But as opposed to this, discretionary stuff and bias is something that the law doesn't necessarily require, but providers can add their own criteria to really kind of exacerbate the impact. So this can look like landlords not wanting to rent to somebody with a conviction. And these are not things that are necessarily outside the scope of the law, but they're definitely added barriers to people wanting to access housing. And when we talk about when we talk about discretion and bias, we need to focus on the two types of bias that exist. So the first being explicit bias, which is kind of how we traditionally conceptualize bias. This is where an individual is aware of their own prejudices and attitudes towards a certain group, and they have either positive or negative preferences for that particular group, and these preferences are conscious to them. And this, honestly, a lot of times looks like just overt racism or overt sexism or, making racist comments. And these are things that are tied to a person's conscious behavior. As opposed to this, implicit bias or implicit prejudice is an attitude that a person is not consciously aware of towards a specific social group. So an individual's perceptions and behaviors can be influenced by implicit bias they hold, even if they're unaware that they hold such biases. So in the context of criminal justice and community safety, implicit bias has been shown to have significant influence in the outcomes of interactions people have with the police, for example. Police might be more inclined to arrest a suspect who is Black, and prosecutors might be more apt to pursue cases against Black defendants. Furthermore, studies have shown that judges might be given different information about Black defendants than white defendants, and these disparities really compound at every single stage of the diagram that we previewed earlier. And that effect of implicit bias can really snowball and impact a person's life. And so when we talk about the impact of bias, when people are coming to ask for help, or when people are being offered resources and they face this huge barrier of bias, it can really impact the way the client receives those services. It can impact the way it can impact the way if they even want to receive those services. And bias can be a huge barrier for clients to actually want to engage with their case managers, to actually want to engage with providers and service and outreach workers. So I wanted to take a quick second for a reflection here and open up the chat to really get a feel for how you all have seen in your experience how implicit bias or explicit bias towards a client can impact the help, resources, and services they get. This might be, clients sharing their stories with you about something they've experienced in the past. This might be something you've experienced in real time. I would love to know about the experience we have in the room. So I'll give y'all a few seconds to type that in and pop that in the chat. And if you want to come off mute, please do so too.
This helps us answer some of the questions at the end of the slideshow too.
I'm glad. Does anybody have anything they would like to share? Rachel or Ivy, is there anything you've seen in your experience that would be helpful to hear about?
I guess just how frequently maybe your clients have or have not had incarceration be part of their story when you're helping them out, if that's been a hindrance for them.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Um, like I'm not sure quite the background that everybody's coming from, but like in helping out somebody within the county, like if there's been um, hurdles that they've had to overcome because of incarceration and or their record stopping them from moving forward in housing or employment or whatever.
Mhm.
If you've come across that that that
So kind of the explicit bias that people face because of the stigma.
yeah, if anybody's run across that with their clients,
Mhm.
it'd be helpful to know if that's already been an experience or if nobody's experienced that at all.
Mhm. I see Eric said in the chat that explicit bias limits the ability to focus. Oop, scrolled up. Limits the ability to focus on the client's journey and story, therefore preventing them from tapping into the information and referrals that can be accessible to the client. For sure, it's exhausting to constantly have to really combat the stigmas that people are exposed to before even getting to the work that needs to be done. Jonathan said in the chat, I've seen service providers make assumptions based on temporary situations my clients have been forced into in my work with the unhoused community. This puts up additional barriers, specifically when it comes to 290s. For sure. Um, people are more than their circumstances, and really being able to hold space for that is very important. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you, Ivy, for coming off mute. I appreciate that. Okay. Did I skip a slide? No, I did not. Okay. So why is it important for housing providers to understand the impacts of the criminal legal system involvement? So there are lots of reasons, but the kind of big four that we have broken this down into are that the criminal legal system has really far-reaching and really inequitable impacts. Um, that incarceration and homelessness are intertwined and they really amplify the inequities in each other. People with criminal legal system involvement face unique challenges with finding and maintaining housing. And understanding these challenges can help us better serve people. So starting with starting with those 4 points and getting into why we need to talk about mass incarceration. It's because when we talk about people being in prison or people having their experiences of incarceration, it needs to be contextualized with the history of this country and the politics that we live in. So I know we talk about the term mass incarceration a lot these days, but really just defining it, it's the idea or the acknowledgement that the US criminalizes and incarcerates more of its own people than any other country in the history of the world. And it inflicts an enormous amount of harm, primarily on the most vulnerable among us, which is usually the poor people of color. In total, roughly 1.9 million people are incarcerated in the United States, and about 800,000 people are on parole, and 2.9 million people are on probation. And these numbers, I'm sure, are a little outdated already because I think they speak to stats up till 2016. So I think they're even higher. Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and the LGBTQ individuals are disproportionately represented in both homelessness and criminal legal systems. Black people are 38% of the incarcerated, but 12% of US residents. So when we talk about these statistics and kind of the staggering disparities they demonstrate, it's also interesting to see that, when we say that 1.9 million people are incarcerated, that is not where this ends. The kind of far-reaching arm of the law enforcement system and the criminal legal system is seen through parole and probation, seen through community supervision. And so it impacts millions and millions of people. And all of them are touched by the criminal legal system in some way, shape, or form. And these interactions constantly have an impact on their ability to have safe and stable housing. The graph in front of you is a chart that shows kind of the prison population of the United States and federal prisons. And I'm sure, as you can see, there is a huge jump since when? The 80s, I believe. I'm sure you can take a guess as to why, but a lot of the numbers that we see in this chart are a lot higher, I assume now. And so when we talk about mass incarceration, we talk about the inequities that are built into that. So BIPOC people are more severely sanctioned than white people. Many data sources show that white and Black people use drugs at a similar rate, yet we know that Black people who use drugs are much more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. We know that Black men get longer sentences than similarly situated white men. We know that in addition to race, darker skin tone has also been found to be associated with worse criminal legal outcomes. And because of the inherent racial bias in the criminal legal system, the use of background checks has a racially discriminatory impact. So for that last point, disparities are usually due to the systemic racism and inequity built into the system, right? So even if something is race neutral, because of these built-in inequities in the system, we know that things impact BIPOC folks at a much, much more disproportionate level. So bringing this conversation into the local context, right here, this graph shows the 2020 population of San Mateo by race and ethnicity. So we see that white people make up about 40.8% of the population, Hispanic people make up 26.2%, and Black people make up about 2.5% of the population. So keeping these numbers in mind, when we switch over to the race and ethnicity makeup of the arrests in 2020, we see that Hispanic people make up 41.3% of all arrests, and Black people make up 15.4%. So they are grossly overrepresented in arrests when you compare them to the population metrics of San Mateo. Okay, so transitioning from this conversation into understanding the intersectional nature of housing, homelessness, race, and the criminal legal system, we start with acknowledging that being incarcerated increases your risk of experiencing homelessness and vice versa. People who have experienced incarceration more than once are 13 times more likely to experience homelessness than the general population. And people experiencing homelessness are 11 times more likely to be arrested than the general population. So the 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 stats really speak to how cyclical this relationship is. And so why do we see a cyclical relationship? And these are just some examples as to why, but I think they really speak to kind of the far-reaching impacts of being incarcerated. So being in jail or prison can lead to a job loss, losing your housing, and losing your personal and social connections. If you're incarcerated, you can't pay rent. If you're incarcerated, you can't show up to work. If you're incarcerated, you can't get your stuff moved into storage. And this, it takes one thing for it to kind of snowball out of control. Communities also rely on police to address unsheltered homelessness. And so in the California context, unsheltered people were 10 times more likely to experience police contact than people living in shelters, as seen through 2015 and 2017. So again, having that higher ratio of interaction with police leads to a higher criminal legal involvement, and can again snowball out of control. Being unhoused can make it really hard for people to comply with supervision conditions. Violations and reincarceration can disrupt the stability of a person. Often people, when they come in, when they're out and they're trying to re-enter into society, it is so hard to navigate systems that are generally hard for everybody, but so much more harder when you're re-entering from incarceration. And the smallest thing can make you out of compliance with your supervision conditions and can really crumble the stability that it takes so much work to build. The criminal legal system and the homelessness care systems of care also work in really separate silos. So despite the cyclical relationship, they really are not two systems that talk to each other a lot. So that means that people who are re-entering back into society are having to navigate two very complicated systems simultaneously and do it at the cost of their own time, of their own understanding, and their own money often. It's expensive to re-enter. It's expensive to pay supervision fees. It's expensive to pay court fees. And then while you're trying to find housing, you're struggling to find a job. You're struggling to find something that could give you stable income. You're constantly telling your story over and over and over again to providers in both systems. And so it is exhausting for a person to navigate this. And so the thing that can stop this all is quality housing, right? So quality housing can help break this cycle. Increasing access to quality housing is critical to ending homelessness and mass incarceration, as well as promoting racial equity. And studies have shown time and time again that housing first, which is this idea that everybody's housing ready, we do not put barriers or conditions for them to be housing ready, that housing first and permanent supportive housing reduces arrests and jail stays and improves quality of life, increasing access to services and increasing housing stability. So it's very simple. It's just like saying, you know, housing ends homelessness, but it really is the answer to the problem that's at hand. So I've spoken a lot and I want to take a bit of a breather and hold some time to see if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns coming up for them before we go into the next section. Y'all are a really quiet group today.
Sarah, we had an interesting comment in the chat from the Housing Authority. They said they changed their background review process because the sheriff's office background report lists more information than they needed to see, which might have biased the folks who had to make the decisions on approving or denying applications.
How interesting. That makes a lot of sense, though. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and I think maybe the comment speaks a little bit to the reflection question I have for you all, which is what kind of barriers are experienced by people you serve who have been impacted by the criminal legal system?
Hi, that was actually my comment,
Mhm.
Housing Authority. So the thing with the sheriff's office was that they were showing everything that a client was like involved in, not necessarily charged with. So when we had someone, we actually had like one of our attorneys, our county attorneys review our process. And, you know, and it also goes beyond 7 years, which we're not allowed to even look at. So I'm glad somebody brought that to our attention, you know, because a lot of times when I would look at it with a client, they would say, I wasn't actually charged with that. They dropped that. It was, you know, it was removed, it was expunged or whatever. But I'm like, my mind has seen 20 charges related to drug possession or, you know, whatever it is, right? So I think, you know, I try to be as neutral as possible, but I can't guarantee that for every single person I work with, right? Like if we don't get the same training or we don't get the, you know, we're not involved in the same conversations, we don't always know if we're as an agency being consistent. So we did totally change our process like about 4 years ago or something. So it's helping a lot. But yeah, that was yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Emmeline. I think what you're saying too also speaks to kind of the discretion and bias piece we were talking about earlier, you know, making sure that we're able to provide as much consistency as possible. And it sounds great. It's great that you reviewed your process to ensure that. Thank you so much for sharing. Vanessa, I see a question in the chat. I don't know if you have an answer for that.
So given the new parameters of care court, how do you see this playing out with unsheltered individuals potentially getting a misdemeanor after refusing shelter 2 times? I don't know. Isn't that potentially exacerbating the criminal justice system even more? That
I
do.
appreciate
Yes.
I appreciate the I don't know, because I've been trying to figure out how we can criminalize homelessness, which is exactly what this is doing.
Yes. Yeah, yes, I agree with you. Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to see how care court plays out. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is going to be up to judicial discretion too, right? Or prosecutor discretions. I mean, that's the thing. Just because somebody gets arrested for a misdemeanor doesn't mean that, you know, the district attorney has to actually follow through on those charges. They could dismiss them. Or B, that a judge in a care court isn't going to say, you know, I don't see a misdemeanor here. I see these other options for people. So I think fortunately or unfortunately, because that's going through a court system, there's some other components, judges and DAs that are going to kind of vary by location, quite frankly, in courtroom across the state.
Thanks for that. I think I'm in agreement 100% with you on that.
Yeah. I see Daryl put in the chat that couples have a real problem when one has a record. This can end up dividing the family, especially if there are children involved. Yeah, that's a true reality. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Some people are blocked from entering the shelter or cannot access housing vouchers or veteran services. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Keith shared that he once worked with an individual who was convicted of a 290 offense, and before he could be housed, he needed approval of his PO. Advised that he could not easily contact his PO, and I tried to assist. Many weeks went before the PO responded, and in the end, he did not get approved or denied for the housing opportunity that was on the table. That's unfortunate that this impacted the client's housing outcomes so drastically. Cynthia, I see your comment about BIPOC people being impacted negatively. I mean, I think the criminal legal system impacts everybody negatively, but I think we're really just trying to highlight that it has a disproportionate impact on BIPOC folks. So by no means saying that it does not impact people who are not BIPOC.
No, I was saying when Vanessa said the thing about the judges and
I
it'd be
see.
up to the judges. I said according to the stats, that means the people of color are still gonna be negatively impacted by the misdemeanors.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, absolutely. It's just gonna keep exacerbating the built-in inequities in the system. So you're correct there. All right. Any other reflections before we move on? Thank you so much for this participation. It is great hearing about the things that you have seen in your work. Happens often with 290s, very difficult to get them housed or eligible for any vouchers due to the status. Yeah. Very true and very understandable. All right, thank you all for sharing. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but please keep putting your reflections in the chat if you need to. Okay, so moving on to the next section, which is identifying what a criminal record can and, more importantly, cannot tell us. So let's start with what it cannot tell us, right? We know that a criminal record cannot tell us the outcome of a case. So a lot of criminal records out there are usually obtained through courts or background check agencies, and they can be incomplete or inaccurate. They may not have the most up-to-date information about if somebody was convicted or if the case was dismissed or it's on appeal, or if the case is expunged or sealed at some point. So it's important to question that, and it's important to assess if what you have in front of you is accurate. We cannot learn if somebody is dangerous. I know this is like a hard concept because I think a lot of times we just want the ease of being able to make an assessment quickly, and a criminal record seems like a good proxy to make this assessment of whether somebody is dangerous or not. But it's a disservice to everybody, right? Because we know that these records can be inaccurate, and we know that given the inequities that we just talked about, mostly what a criminal record is telling us is what community they belong to and how over-policed they are. They also do not tell us who that person is today. It's simply a snapshot of an interaction they had with the criminal legal system. And it's a snapshot that's maybe, it's just maybe capturing a person's worst moment or a worst time of their life, and really does not speak to who they are as a person and who they are outside of the circumstances. Records are also not a proxy of trustworthiness. Think of all the people you know that do not have a criminal record, but are not trustworthy. You would not trust them with anything. So we know that it's not a proxy for trustworthiness. So we should not be assigning this to people who do have criminal records. People who may have a criminal record may have really proven their trustworthiness time and time again. So this should not be a system or a metric we use to assess that and to decide who is deserving of resources. And it definitely does not tell us who will become a good tenant. And this is really important because I think this is kind of the gauge that a lot of housing providers and landlords use. But if we go to the next slide, if I can go to the next slide, you'll see that there is no empirical evidence showing that people with records are bad tenants. And I have two resources here, and these are clickable links. So when we share the slides out, I hope you'll take a look at them. But the HUD website shares that although a few studies examined the association between criminal history and housing success, no empirical evidence exists to justify a blanket exclusion of people with criminal histories from housing. And a review published in the NYC Journal of Legislation and Public Policy found that no empirical evidence establishing a relationship between a criminal record and an unsuccessful tenancy existed in the supportive housing context. So these are two, so this, and this study looked at two large scale, this review looked at two large scale rigorous studies, and it compared outcomes for people who had criminal history to people who did not. So when I say that there is no association of criminal record with someone being a bad or good tenant, it is something that is backed by, stats and studies. So let's talk about what we can learn by a person's criminal history. And the first thing we have to talk about is really getting someone's voluntary permission to be able to look at their history, right? So making sure that that person is on board and okay with us looking into it. So it tells us what type of contact a person has had with the criminal legal system. And, when we think about this, we also need to keep in mind of how that contact is influenced by all these external factors such as race, ethnicity, age, gender, skin color, socioeconomic background, and neighborhood, just to name a few. It might really help us to figure out which services might help. So for example, if you're seeing a lot of drug possession convictions, you may want to offer voluntary drug treatment, just to give an example. It allows, the information allows to understand the client as a whole and build rapport. So the rap sheet cannot tell you the complete story, but it provides you a small glimpse of a really difficult experience a person has had. And being able to respond to that in a compassionate way can help you build a lot of trust. It also allows providers and case managers to understand the trauma-informed approaches specific to custodial trauma and how trauma-informed approaches can provide support. So this is a whole training topic in itself, and it is actually our next training topic. So just previewing that here for a little bit, but this idea comes from the understanding that the experience of being in jail or in prison, or honestly, the experience of having an interaction with a cop, all of them are extremely traumatizing events for many, many reasons, including the fact that carceral settings are often subject people to a lot of violence and a lot of abuse. So and finally, it helps people figure out what housing options and supports will best align with any community supervision requirements that are imposed on a person coming back into society. So these are the two big topics of what a criminal record can and cannot tell us. And I want to hold some space for any questions that you may have, or any comments or thoughts that are coming up as you're listening to me talk and see these slides. Okay, if there are no questions, maybe we can take our 5-minute break before we come back and resume the next half of our training. Thank you so much. We will get back here at, oh my God, I have to do math in front of everybody. We'll get back here in 5 minutes. I'll put the timing in the chat. Righty. We are back. I'll give it a second or two for people to come back from their breaks and we can get going. Okay. Moving on to the next section, which is recognizing and minimizing housing barriers for people with past convictions. So there are a lot of strategies that speak to this, and a lot of those strategies can be their own full-length 2-hour trainings. So what we decided to do here was really pick 3 and provide resources that speak to these 3 strategies in this PowerPoint, so that you have materials to take back with you to share with your colleagues and people you work with, as well as the recording after the training. So the first is record review. The second is referring to legal services for record clearing. And the last is developing a targeted plan to address barriers. So starting with the first, which is a record review, it's important that while you're working with your client, you are asking questions about a client's criminal history and explaining why you're asking for this information and how this information might be used. If you determine that someone has a criminal record with their permission, assist them in obtaining their criminal history records and review the record with them for accuracy, and make sure that you have the most updated information possible. Individuals have the right to request a copy of their own criminal history from the California Department of Justice, and a lot of people can qualify for a fee waiver as well, so it can be done for free then. And information on requesting your record and the fee waiver are both linked in this slide. And so they take you directly to the website and kind of outline the eligibility criteria for what it takes to qualify for a fee waiver and how you can go about requesting your record. The second strategy is referring folks to legal services for record clearing. So, a person might qualify for expungement, which is a method for clearing up your criminal record. And this procedure essentially allows a criminal case to be reopened, the conviction to be dismissed, and then reclosing the case without that conviction. And this means that when, a person's background check happens, this is not showing up on their record and impeding them from getting access to services or housing or whatever it is. And so what we decided to do here was to really highlight the resources that are San Mateo and California specific that can help with that, because this is something that you would definitely need legal assistance with. And so there are a lot of legal aids and legal partners that work with the homeless system of care to help people with their record clearing so that they can be better equipped and better positioned to apply for housing and be successful in attaining it. So the resources are everything from the California Courts self-help guide that allows people to kind of figure out what they would need to get this process started. The Community Legal Services of East Palo Alto are, I think, more San Mateo specific. And then the collateral consequences of conviction has a lot of California relevant statutes that people would need to be mindful of as they're thinking about record clearing. Root and Rebound has some great resources on the foundations and basics of what it takes to clean up your record and what are the different terminologies and specifics for each type of record clearing option. And then the San Mateo County Law Library also has a guide to record expungement and kind of the forms and resources you'd need to get that started. Finally, the Legal Help for Non-Citizens is a resource created by the Immigration Advocates Network, and this is oriented more towards people who may not have documentation or may need a bit more help with their record clearing as it pertains to their immigration status. The final strategy I have is developing a targeted plan to address barriers. So this includes a few different things. The first is using your client's criminal history to build a rental packet. So this is really unique and individualistic process. It's responsive to the client's unique situation. And the idea behind creating a packet like this is to really actively respond to this idea that criminal records are not a proxy for success as a tenant, right? So these packets really demonstrate that your client can be a responsible tenant. So getting references from former landlords, getting letters from community members that speak to the client's character and or personal development, adding certificates that show that the client has completed all relevant programs that they need to. So that could be like substance abuse treatment, domestic violence intervention programs, or even job certifications or things they've done to continue and complete their education. Also adding evidence that a conviction was sealed, dismissed, vacated, expunged, or overturned on appeal is really important because you want to make sure you are showing up with the most up-to-date information on a person's record, and also emphasizing that certain information does not need to be considered by landlords when they're thinking about who to rent out to. Also adding letters of support, demonstrating community connections is really important, showing that this person has the social and familial connections to be successful and stable after their time being incarcerated. Just helps the landlords to really build that trust and be more eager to rent out to people. Other strategies include really talking to your client about their criminal background. So let your clients know that landlords might ask them really broad or maybe really detailed questions about their criminal background. Ensure your client is familiar with the information that is in their criminal record so that they know what a landlord is allowed to consider and not consider. Working with your client to role play and kind of talk through the questions that a landlord might ask might make it really helpful for a person to fine tune their narrative, be able to tell their story, and really contextualize their incarceration with bigger aspects of their life, and reiterate that this is just simply a snapshot of one circumstance. Reminding clients that landlords are not allowed to consider all types of criminal history, and they should know what their rights are under the California Fair Employment and Housing Act is also really important. So this is a California law that it's a civil law that basically prohibits housing and employment discrimination based on certain characteristics. And this ensures rights for tenants and then also lets landlords know what they can and cannot consider. And being familiar with this is just really empowering for both sides involved. Again, this is a very in-depth and a topic much bigger than this training, but we wanted to ensure that you had resources to think about this, so we have linked that in this slide. Finally, providing tailored support for people on the sex offense 290 registry is also really important. I know we talked about this a little bit in the chat of just kind of the added barriers that people on the registry face, and it makes an already really hard process even harder. So referring to legal services that can help people with retiering on the registry or help them even remove from the registry, depending on the specifics of their case, can be really helpful. And again, we have linked a lot of the 290 registry specific resources in this slide to look through. In addition to those specific resources, I also wanted to share some resources that Homebase has put out there that can be really helpful. So the first one is the No Bars to Home report, which is a really all-encompassing report that highlights the essential elements and key takeaways of successful housing programs that are supporting people impacted by the criminal legal system. And it has a particular focus on folks who were formerly incarcerated. We have linked a tools and resources page, which will take you to our CLSI initiative page at Homebase, and it has all sorts of resources on everything from FEHA to working with people in the 290 registry, working on landlord engagement, supporting people without immigration status, and so on and so forth. So please make sure to check that out, as it can also be very helpful in the work that you do. Finally, we wanted to offer the opportunity for folks to sign up for the CLSI newsletter that goes out. It's usually chock full of also really good resources that get put up on the website, and has a lot of really cool opportunities for communities to participate in. And both of these resources also the CLSI website and the newsletter can also help you all stay tuned for any upcoming webinars and trainings that might be coming down our way. And on that note about upcoming trainings, I just also wanted to highlight that next month on May 1st, we are going to be doing the second part of this training, of this CLS training. And that's going to be serving clients with custodial trauma. And it's going to focus on the kind of traumas that individuals experience in incarceration and strategies for caseworkers and providers to employ that can help people. And we will also have co-presenters from the community bringing their lived experience expertise to the conversation. So that is on May 1st from 1 to 3 p.m. And I have added the link to register, and I'm sure an email will also go out soon, but I just wanted to make sure that you had that information ready to go. And at the end, I just wanted to show you all some glossary terms that we thought would be helpful to have some kind of level setting around the language that we use. I think most of you might be familiar with them already, but I just thought it's nice to have a foundational basic option for everybody. So just kind of understanding the difference between jail, prison, what probation is, what parole is, and then different processes like revocation, electronic monitoring, fines, fees, restitution, and how these work with each other. Okay, so moving on to the second part of the training is our panel Q&A. But before I do that, I want to hold some space for questions or comments that are coming up as I was speaking. Okay. If we don't have anything, then I will go ahead and introduce our panelists today. I'm very excited to introduce to you Ivy Clark and Rachel Day. Ivy is a mom of 2 grown children, and her youngest just actually had their birthday yesterday. She is a returning student in the paralegal field at Skyline College's ABA program with a graphic design background and school bus driving experience. She lived 8 to 10 years in shelters and tents on the side of the freeway. And now, 4.5 years later, Ivy has a 3rd-story ocean view apartment with her 9 pounds of a service Chihuahua dog. And she really credits her success to her faith and resourcefulness in her recovery. We also have today Rachel, who is a peer support worker and an artist and a public speaker, and she uses her lived experiences and creative skills to educate and engage with her community. Both Ivy and Rachel are part of the League, which is the Lived Experience Advisory Group, I believe. And they're both here to answer some questions that we have prepared for you today, and then really answer any questions that you may have for them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if we can all talk together and be able to see each other's faces together before we start the panel. Hi, Ivy. Hi, Rachel. Are y'all ready?
I'm ready.
Great. Okay. I have pinned you both so that people can see your faces as you're talking, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for lending your time and expertise to this conversation. And I guess I'll start with the first question for you both, and you can answer in whichever order feels good. But can you please talk about the impact of being justice involved, the impact that it has on a person's housing journey based on your own personal experience or what you've seen for others?
Ivy, do you want to go first or do you want me to go? All right, I'll start. I'll start with way back as a kid. I added it up last night, and in 8 years, we moved 14 times when I was a kid between my dad getting arrested and us getting evicted, or we just couldn't afford the bills without him, or my mom getting arrested, and then it turned into my brother, and then eventually me. And every single time it was like a bad version of playing Monopoly. It was, oh, go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Everything in your life has to start over. And when I say everything, I mean everything. you lose your job, you know, your credit history goes to crap because your bills didn't get paid while you were locked up. You have this gap in your employment history. You know, if you were going to school, that's done. You lost all that money and time and all this stuff. Eventually it beats you down to the point where you don't have that confidence anymore that you feel you can even go apply for an apartment or a job. And it becomes, I can't say the word very well, this it becomes a really vicious cycle and you get stuck in it. It impacts every part of your life, your family, your kids. Like my kids were horrified when I had to go to jail. And I spent a year in jail while my kids were playing soccer and, you know, starting middle school. And it was horrible for them and for me. And it's affected them as well now, them as adults. So it's not just the housing thing, it's everything. Your turn, Ivy.
Okay. Let me put a timer on so that I try and stay short and sweet. For me, I actually was raised in a pretty stable home, but I did have parents that got divorced. And when I experienced a 6-year marriage and then a 9-year custody battle, I ended up having an eviction on my record after that 9-year custody battle because a lot of my finances went towards the attorney fees. And with that eviction, I moved into the Redwood City Maple Street shelter in May when it was raining, and started my 8 to 10 years in the shelters. And at age 37, I started my record, which in 4 years, I went to jail 17 times, and incarceration was reoccurring once I was on probation. And what I learned my first time is they had stacked up 7 to 8 charges. And they just told me to plead guilty or no contest to the worst one. And then they would let me go home that day. And that's what I learned, that, you know, I'd have 11-day turnarounds to where, you know, you plead no contest and you get to go home that after 11 days. But even at the shelter, those times that I would be in like warehouses and congregated shelters, people would want me to give them a rundown of what medications I was coming in the door with. Not staff necessarily, but people just wanted to, you know, be in trade and exchanging different things. So I constantly felt like there was exchanges and give and takes going on. But what I can say is that the hardship of if I wasn't going to jail, the police seemed to wipe their hands of me and send me to 72-hour psych holds. So there were times with those 3-day turnarounds that sometimes the doctors would let me go with a shower and a meal on the same shift that the cops were there, and let them know that that's not how they wanted to handle the mental health and substance use disorders. So I had a chance to salvage my stuff, but the 11-day jail stints, most of the time my possessions were gone. But usually the cycle with Caltrans was to get a 3 to 4 month or 3 to 4 day notice every 4 months to be bulldozed. And what would happen those days, the cops would show up, the days bulldozing would happen, to check everybody's ID to see whose warrants were out. And so, you know, you just had to hope that you didn't have a bench warrant for missing a court date. And a lot of times, if you did, you have to try and be at court before the clerk calendared everything at 8:15 so that you had a good faith for showing up to clear that warrant. But a lot of the times the cops would just pull your rap or the warrant, the active warrants to look for you on probation while you were on the street, to flip around and search and seize you. It was constant headache. That was 3.5 minutes. Sorry, I went a little over.
No, you're fine. We have plenty of time. We're doing great on time, so don't worry about like not saying what you need to for timing's sake. But thank you for sharing that, both of you. And I think both of you really highlighted kind of like the cyclical nature of being incarcerated and being unhoused, but also kind of how they play into each other. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how like how that instability really exacerbated your housing situation.
It becomes a cycle that, like, I wasn't aware of it as a kid and as a teenager. And then when I became an adult and I inherited all that mess and I was the one going to jail, and then I couldn't pay probation fees, or I couldn't make it to probation because it was 75 miles away, and I'd get violated and end up back in jail. And like I said, it was like playing Monopoly, like do not pass go, do not collect $200. I never seemed to be able to make it to pass go and get that $200 and start getting ahead before I would, boom, get knocked back down. And my original charge was in Pennsylvania. It's where I'm from. I'm from Philly. I got charged with one joint. Possession of a small amount of marijuana is what I was convicted of. It was supposed to be 6 months of probation. That turned into 9 years on parole and 4 times in and out of jail. I ended up doing a year in jail at the end of it and maxed out on that sentence just to be done with probation, because I kept ending up back on the street, or, having to start back over and like it went from a nice apartment to a crappy apartment to a really crappy apartment. Things just got worse and worse every time because you never get ahead that way.
Yeah. So, Rachel, can you then tell us when things did turn around, what did the supports do well? What did your case manager do well for you to be able to do that?
After I did my year in jail and completely relocated and was homeless for the longest time, my caseworker, she saw past all that. And she saw that, one, she believed in housing first, and I do too. It does change lives. Because when Life Moves first encountered me, I was a mess. I was in way into active addiction. And the only thing I really cared about was getting clean needles. In all honesty, I didn't even care about housing at that point. But they saw past that, and she really she gave me hope that somebody was going to help me. Because by this point, after all these years of nobody helping me, everybody closing doors, everybody writing me off as like a waste and like useless to society, I believe that. They saw past that and saw that, like, if we can get you stable, you can be a positive member of society. I didn't even believe it at the time. I really didn't. But you know, once they got me into housing, that all changed. But she explained that process to me step by step as to what I needed. If I needed documents, she would have helped me get them, which I was lucky. I didn't have an ID, and she helped me get that. But I didn't have my birth certificate and my social security card. But if I didn't, she would have helped me get that stuff. She walked me through the process of getting my criminal record, even took me down to the courthouse to get it, and like really explained to me like what they were looking for, and why my like stupid pot charge wasn't even a big deal. Like here in California, everybody laughed at me. They're like, "You went to jail for a joint?" I'm like, "Yeah." But she really made me feel that I wasn't that disconnected, just not a part of this society in general. That I wasn't just like, an undesirable, I guess would be the word. Um, she also brought like she kind of like what Emmeline was saying about everybody looking back too far. That was something else that like she was like, don't worry about it. That stuff is all so old. It doesn't even apply to you. So she really she made me feel like it was okay, which her giving me that little bit of confidence allowed me to like reach out for other resources. And the more resources I reached out for, the more help I got, the better I got. And I mean, it's been 5 years and I've been clean for all of that now. Like getting housed really changed my life. Haven't been arrested in almost a decade now. It does change who you are.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Ivy, you talked a little bit about with me earlier on creating a narrative and being ready to answer the questions that landlords may have for you, like being ready to go in anticipating what they might want and coming in with your rental packet ready to go. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that process for you, talk about what you thought, how you first thought about putting it together, what you put into it, and what was the impact?
Well, I really have to plug Spring Street Shelter's Sunday afternoon 6-week course that Renee Walsh did, and the advocacy that Georgia, the director there, was able to figure out for me in advocating coming from a safe house, and that actually being something that qualified me to be statistically, or to be quantified as the homeless still, if coming from a residential safe house, because that bumped me up on the housing voucher list. But once I got a voucher, trying to find a landlord took me 8 months. And part of Renee's 6-week class not only talked about self-care and had a similar like Monopoly game of learning how to pay your bills with discounts as you maintained your housing payment, but she went over a tenant portfolio. And my tenant portfolio had an intro letter that explained like some of my goals and the type of person that I was, and what I was doing in my free time and some of my traits, and then the content. So that on that front page within what I could find at the dollar store was just a plastic outside cover with the, the slider bar to bind it together. That was enough to be able to hand over in exchange for their blank application when I was meeting them face to face, without calling, and because I've had a lot of friends call landlords and just out the gate say, hey, do you take Section 8? And like, I wouldn't just close that at the front. I would meet them face to face, and this tenant portfolio was critical in presenting myself, because it had my education and work info, kind of like a resume. It also had my credit report. It had a letter addressing my background check and included that 5-page background check, which I came to Georgia at Spring Street Shelter. I was like, 5 pages, who's gonna rent to me? Like, with a background check this long, like, there's just no way. I couldn't believe that it was so long, and it described all these things that weren't legit charges, but because they were in ink, I addressed it and said, that's not who I am. That's not my character, and my schooling goals state that, I've changed paths, and my recovery shows for it. And so I got professional and personal character reference letters to show what I was up to since I had left jail. I also had some scholarship reward letters that I put in there, and I said that I would provide upon request things like renter's insurance, income verification, credit checks, anything that I didn't feel that I wanted to disclose in that portfolio, I said I'd provide upon request. But that was, and then at the end of it, the housing department has on their website like little trifold pamphlets that describe perks for the landlord to accept, like bonuses, and the description of the housing program, and things that like 3 or 4 pages in the back of my portfolio that like insisted why it was something for the landlord to take a look at, because it was guaranteed income for them.
That's smart that you had you added your own information along with the landlord incentives in your portfolio.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how this packet was met? What was the impact? Like, what were the responses you were getting from providers and landlords?
They didn't even want me to fill out their application more often than not, unless they were like a property manager and had to run their own credit checks because they were, like a corporation. And some of them turned me down because I had like no credit history, even though my credit score was high. They just didn't have the history because I'd been sitting on the side of their freeway for so long, so they just had to turn me down because the inexperience of credit. But like it impressed most people because they didn't even want to look at my background. They just saw that I was prepared to handle all objections that they might have.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful to hear. Ivy, what would have been helpful for you in terms of knowing about how to review your own record, or what kind of services are available or were available to you then for expungement or record sealing? Like what do you wish you had known then, or what do you wish was provided to you then?
To be honest with you, I'm still stumbling and fumbling through this. At Skyline and Kenyatta and CSM, they have like programs for people with records, and they offer every semester to get your fingerprints and expunge record. But somehow, like, I get falling through the cracks and I don't get it done each semester. So East Palo Alto Legal Aid Services is offered to pick me up on their next schedule because I wasn't able to commute down there before their time frame closed with their walk-in clinic last couple months ago. I guess they do it quarterly, but yeah, I'm still trying to get my last felony off my record. But I was lucky enough with my internship where the attorney didn't need my background check, but going into paralegal field and with my graduation this May, I'm pretty sure that, you know, that's going to be something that the legal realm will need as a qualifying employment need, you know, to have a clean slate. I would almost imagine.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, I think it's helpful to hear your frustrations of like what didn't work, and East Palo Alto Center is something that we have also linked as a potential resource. So I'm glad that they were able to pick you up, and I'm hoping that that works out for you.
Thanks.
For the both of you, I'm curious, what is something surprising you learned from dealing and interacting with the criminal legal system that you think many housing providers don't know, or you wish they'd know?
I'm going to say how badly and disproportionately the legal system punishes the poor, because it goes back to that whole, like, it's a cycle, it's a big cycle. If you have money, if you say you're arrested for a crime and you have money, you can pay for bail and you can get out and your life can continue on, and then you can hire an attorney who's going to fight that charge for you. You're probably going to get a much smaller sentence. You're going to have paying the fines off is not going to be a problem. Paying your supervision fees for probation isn't a problem. So all of these things that you have to do just to stay out of jail, they're going to come before you pay your other bills. And what happens then is you end up with the evictions and with bills that don't get paid. So when you look at people's credit, that may be also reflecting their criminal history and, you know, their employment history. And there's so many other things that your criminal record is going to affect that I didn't even think about, like my driver's license. Like, I have not been in trouble for a decade. I've been off of probation for almost, you know, a decade now, but I still don't have my driver's license back. Not because I don't want it, but because I can't afford all the fines I had to pay, the stupid DUI class, the stupid reinstatement fee, because my license was out of Delaware. I have to pay the out-of-state fees. It's going to cost me another $1,000 before I get my license back. So I guess just be slightly like, look into people's, when they show you their criminal history or they show you their credit, let them explain where all that comes from. Because I know a lot of counties put your fines on your credit history, and that affects it as well. So those are things I never thought about the first time I got in trouble. That one joint ended up costing me like at least 15 grand and 2.5 years in jail. So it just adds on itself.
Yeah. And that's very real. Thank you for sharing that. Ivy, did you?
I just wrote a short answer, but in listening to Rachel, I could probably come up with a little bit more.
Please do.
But I'm going to reset my timer. So what I wrote for this particular question is that the legal system does punish the poor and it's constantly changing. to hinder the poor, like what I remember sitting in there and watching everybody go to get to what is it, whoever it is that sets their bail and lets them out while they're sitting in
Commissioner.
intake. What is it?
The commissioner for your bail reduction hearings.
Yeah, while you're sitting in, before you even get dressed in orange, right after fingerprinting. Anyways, I remember them saying, because I didn't have an address, I didn't even get the opportunity to have a conversation about setting bail. And so I just had to go sit and wait to be dressed out to go sit and wait for my court dates for that 11-day turnaround to meet the judge and then be sentenced 11 days later, or have my sentencing complete 11 days later, 10 or 11 days later. And so that went on over and over and over. Like I said, 17 times in 4 years was a long time, but my last time frame was 8 months, and that would let me off my probation because I was there for so long that I wasn't bothered by the police after that 8 months, because I didn't have that probation for them to U-turn and search and seize me whenever they wanted. Because that probation allowed them to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And I was surprised by that. So I started getting spiteful, to be honest with you, and started packing my stuff in colored containers in bags with multiple zippers, so that when they did scatter my stuff all over the sidewalk, I would just taunt them with, like, did you find the white bag or the white container with the white stuff yet? You know, because that's what they were looking for. And I would make sure that I didn't have any substances on me, but you know, that they would just get frustrated with me, and I would tell them, you have to pack it up the way you found it. And we'd go back and forth, you know. Well, some of them would let me smoke a cigarette, some of them wouldn't, but you know, we came to be very apparent who those were, that there were abusive ones and who were compassionate to the domestic violence situations that I was exposed to out in the streets. You know, because some of them would put hands on me to show me that, you know, that there were domestic issues with the police themselves. And that was really frustrating and shocking. But like Rachel said, you know, like there was a very big stigma and statistic treatment of people not even seeing you as human when you were out there, whether you were homeless or incarcerated, like you're just a number. And for me, I lost custody of my kids for just having a medical marijuana card the Friday before Mother's Day, and that like spun me out on the 8 to 10 years out on the street. But knowing all that, I will give accolades to Georgia, the director at Spring Street, because she was very sensitive when I went through the assessment at the beginning of being put on the housing voucher list. And she tried to express the sensitivity of the trauma that I had gone through when he asked me some of the questions, so that he knew to be sensitive to the situations that, you know, that I would have to answer vulnerably. As he was putting me higher and higher up on the priority list with the domestic violence trauma that I experienced, and you know, some of the rapes that I had gone through living out on the streets as long as I did. But I was denied services while I was on the streets at CORA, the Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse, because they said that I was hostile and trying to get services coming out of the detox center next door at Palm Avenue. And I was like, dude, I am just trying to get help from somebody somewhere. And everybody was just like, you're just too hostile. And I'm like, but I'm desperate. And nobody seemed to get that. And I was so grateful that, like, to be in the room when Georgia was on the phone with speakerphone, trying to communicate that desperation that I was at when I came back to her shelter after she had seen me various times with black eyes and stuff. And walked me through my final time at the shelter. So I just encourage whoever is on this call to have that sensitivity and be invested in your clients so that they can have a successful transition as they're handed off to all the different resources that are in that community handbook. Because a lot of times the descriptions aren't really what is being offered. And if you hand somebody off phone call to phone call, you know that they're going to get the services that you think they're going to get, because all three, your client and the two people that are managing the situation, are aware of what needs to be, the needs that need to be met. So it's not a dead end rabbit hole or U-turn boomerang situation. I ran into that a lot while I was out there.
So those warm handoffs were really important instead of you just
Yeah.
kind of having to figure it out by
Right.
yourself and keep retelling your story over and over
Right.
again. Yeah. Thank you, Ivy. That's I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing that. Did you still want to add to like what Rachel was talking about? We have time. I wanted to make sure you had space for that.
No, that a lot of that was based on what she was talking about. She probably isn't going to like the fact that I was out on the street for as long as I was, that my credit and my child support and my lack of payments for everything, maybe something some of you guys might want to recommend to your clients not to pay for 7+ years, because I was able to get my driver's license back for not making child support payments and not making my traffic court payments and my restitution payments, that they gave it back to me after 10 years of not being responsive to any of that. And so I'm sorry, Rachel, but that was my story when I was in the shelter. I couldn't believe my credit or my driver's license.
I was actually out on the street long enough for my credit to be cleared up, but
Yeah,
because my driver's license is out of Delaware, Delaware won't release it until I take the DUI class and pay their fines. And I'm getting there. I'm working it off.
yeah, I hear the DUI classes are really hard because you can't get like scholarships or discounts or anything like that.
It's almost $900 just for
Yeah.
the class. And then I have to pay Delaware like a couple $100 for the permission to take it out of state, and then to pay the reinstatement fee. And I'm like,
Right.
but you know what? I haven't driven a car in, I want to say it's been like 7 or 8 years now. And I can say I'm doing the environmentally good thing.
Right.
And I promised myself I will not buy one until I can afford an electric one and I have a license. So it's giving me a long-term goal to work towards.
Well, and a good goal to work with Peninsula Family Services. They actually offer help with loans for electric cars and vehicles after you take their financial planning class. So that's a good resource for you and anybody's clients for financial planning with Peninsula Family Services. And that was something Renee Walsh encouraged in her 6-week class as well.
Thanks for sharing that, Ivy. I feel like you're a fountain of resource knowledge. Anytime I talk to you, you have a connection or you know somebody who knows somebody. So it's really appreciated that you are sharing all of that with us. Those are the questions I had prepared for you, but I know we have 30 minutes left, and I really want to make sure that the audience here has the opportunity to also ask the questions that have come up for them to you both. So I'm going to open it up to you all. Feel free to come off mute and just ask them or pop them in the chat. Oh, you have a fan in the audience and in the chat, Ivy. Rightly so.
Thanks, Georgia. You walked me through a lot of phases and stages.
Take credit where it's due. You did the work.
Any questions for our panelists? Any comments or concerns that are coming up as you were listening to their experiences, things that you were able to identify in your own experience working with clients? Y'all are so quiet.
I can add some stuff to fill in the void that came up for me while Ivy and Rachel were talking. First of all, thanks so much, y'all, for sharing your stories. They're super impactful. You both are very well spoken. I was really moved by it. I wanted to share one thing with Ivy, which is there's actually a bar association in California that is just formerly incarcerated attorneys. I just put it in the chat, so you should definitely hook up with them and find out more about what is involved with background stuff. But one of y'all was talking about expungement, and I guess the takeaway for providers from the story is that it takes so long to get an expungement. Like, it should be one of the first things you start working on, because it is a journey. And part of the reason is because they live in this weird space in the criminal court where the case is closed. So it's not really on anybody's docket. Nobody owns that case. We do expungements. In my last job, we did expungements, and it was like, even as an attorney, we constantly had to go back to the court. They would lose the paperwork. They wouldn't know where the case would reside. Like, a lot of times the court personnel don't know how to handle them. The judge is dead or off the bench or whatever the case may be. It is such a hard legal process to get through. A lot of attorneys don't do it very well. So just, if you have someone with a record and you think they might be expungement eligible, please prioritize that, because once that record is sealed or expunged or whatever the case may be, it deals with so many problems. So I just can't emphasize enough how much to plan for how long that's going to take. And then I think Rachel was talking about fines, fees, and costs, and just the point that you made about how if you can't pay that ticket right out the gate, like, it's kind of like when you buy a car and you drive it off the lot, it immediately loses value. Like, in California, I read a stat that said something like, if you can't pay a $200 traffic ticket up front, it's immediately like $800, because once you get on a payment plan, you have all these court costs. And so for any providers that have discretionary funds of any kind, and you've talked with a public defender and you can't get the person out of the ticket, if there is a way to pay a ticket up front and not have to go on a payment plan, I mean, it just, the cascade of things that we've heard about here today can be completely avoided by several $100s. That's it. That's sometimes all it takes to prevent someone from having to go back from court, and then they miss court, and then they have the bench warrants that we were talking about. And then when they get pulled over for driving on a suspended license, or they're at an encampment and they get another ticket and they have an active warrant and they go back to jail, like, all it really takes is just that one initial payment on that ticket. So I just wanted to emphasize those 2 points that were made today.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's really helpful to hear. We have one question in the chat for the both of you, which is, we talk about how to help, but a large part of what separates you is you. What do you believe was your personal resilience, and how did you tap into that?
Oh my God. My forehead got really callous to the brick walls that I felt like I was just constantly banging my head against. But I finally got to a point where I just realized I could only do one thing a day. And that was discouraging. But I think my biggest shocker was how much everybody expected me to wait. Like, I had nothing better to do with my life but just wait in their lobby. And I had to get to a point of just swallowing my pride and being patient with the waiting process. For every resource, for every question, for anything and everything. And my temper just made it 10 times harder to get the resource. So like, I really had to suck it up and figure out how to wait it out. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but like I think my biggest frustration was that it didn't feel like the people in the resource handbook guide knew what the next resource actually was when they told me, oh, go here or go there. They're supposed to be able to help you with this or that, because it wasn't what it turned out to be. And so I'd have to come back to them and explain it wasn't that, and where else can I go? And then I'd be on 3 other tangents, and yeah, it was exhausting.
You kind of have to become your own advocate, or you just or you just get doors slammed in your face. I
Mm.
think you kind of have to like become the David Goggins of the street, like just saying, no, I'm going to do this. No, get up and do it. Like, and you learn to just show up at human services before they open. And you learn to like that the guidebook that she's talking about, you learn to memorize every single thing in there. And by the time you're done, you realize that you're now like the resource expert in the county, and you're telling everybody else on the street, hey, no, go here and call this person. And I don't know if it's something you tap into or if it's just, it's out of necessity. Like necessity is the mother of invention. You don't have a choice. It's sink or swim. And I'm going to be out here on the street with nothing, or I'm going to keep fighting until they give me something, until somebody helps me.
Mhm.
I think it's more survival than it is like tapping in. I don't know. I guess it's instinct.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that, both of you. Any other questions for our panelists? Well, while you're thinking of questions, because you should, we have a great panel here for you today, and we have some time. While you're thinking of them, I want to also quickly launch a poll for you all, and it's 3 questions, and it's really helpful for us to know what went well, what didn't, what we can do better next time for the future trainings that we plan. So please, take a few minutes to complete this. And Rachel and Ivy are here to answer questions if you need them to.
I don't know if it'll be distracting to say this while you guys are filling out the poll, but one thing that I would say is really validating for me, and maybe for your clients, is I had a psychiatrist that was like really on board when I was very hesitant to be guinea pigged on a bunch of psychiatric medicines, because she was insistent that maybe, just maybe, most of my issues were environmental. And that was very validating to be like, oh, maybe I don't have as many mental health issues as I do have situational and environmental, like survival skill adjustment stuff, like just that was enough to have me like feel acknowledged in the realm of, like not being dismissed, as like a substance use or a mental health patient, like it was like, oh, yeah, you're probably right. I do have environmental and survival situational situations going on as well. And so she was willing to like be very light on the prescriptions, because I was not wanting to be heavily medicated at that point in my existence, because it wouldn't have done me favors to not be alert at night, when I was recycling or trying to just make sure somebody wasn't over my shoulder or whatever. Not to say that my substance abuse or drug of choice was any better, but yeah, she was just very validating in saying that, I had environmental issues that I was trying to overcome as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad that you shared that.
It built trust, I guess, if nothing else. So I just encourage you guys to work with your clients in the bridge building that you can, so that it can strengthen their stories to have successful endings as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have to back her up on what she's saying there, that the more you build your clients up and the more you normalize what they went through, that, hey, the coping skills and the things that you did in those circumstances, they might not have been great, but they got you through. Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. I would just I always support harm reduction, because it totally does work, and meeting people where they are, even if they're not ready to get clean, even if they're not ready to change their lives, just helping them make that step into housing will eventually, like it does get through to people. It rehumanizes them. when you're out on the street, you really become like a feral cat. You're not part of society. You're not part of the culture.
Yeah.
You're kind of part of a whole different society with a whole different set of rules and expectations. And it takes time for people to transition back to like the normal American culture, but we can do it. And you guys wouldn't have recognized me 5 years ago. I guarantee it.
I had a shaved head 4.5 years ago.
Probably not a good look for you, was it? Like my hair didn't look good either, and I was about 100 pounds, maybe soaking wet. But I think that the more that you interact with a person and the more that you show them that, hey, I see you as a person. I don't just see what's on that criminal record. I don't just see what's on your credit history. I see you as a person. And you get to realize what led them to get those criminal records. Because I guarantee you, every single client you have that has a criminal record, the reason they have those charges wasn't just like a one-time, like, oh, I'm going to be a criminal incident. There were things that led up to it and snowball affected. And once you get to know that, you can kind of help them navigate around it and give them that sense of it's okay, that I'm still a human. I can still be part of regular American society. Don't give up on people.
Thank you for saying that. It's really important, I think, for everybody in the room to hear.
And carry Narcan.
Carry Narcan. I just got trained on that stuff. I actually am out of survival as a lifeguard. I had one of the things that I had stolen, because that was what out of survival I had found was my hustle. I took a AED machine, the automatic defibrillator, to be able to shock somebody's heart back into pumping the blood. And I tried to like pretend I couldn't even pronounce it when the cops were like, we know it was you and it was 3 days ago. And I was like, if it was 3 days ago, everything is gone within 24 hours in any camp, because everybody owns everything out of every camp within that quick of a time frame. And I was like, an automatic defibrillator, huh? You know, but that was one of the things I had taken out of survival, to say that our camp was going to be the most safe for anybody if they had OD'd or you know, yeah, that was before fentanyl. But I even when I had lived through campfires, I was carrying the 5-gallon water jugs on either handlebar going into camps to make sure people were hydrated and had water for any type of fire that they would have been subjected to, because I had woken up to a few.
Yeah. Thank
It
you.
was just my trauma response, I guess, to try and survive and become the rescuer thereafter.
Well, Ivy and Rachel, I really want to thank you both so much for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and just letting us know what worked well and what didn't. And I think there's so much value um, in hearing your lived experiences, honestly. It's been so great working with you on this, and and I'm so happy that you had a chance to share your story with everybody here in this training. We have a few minutes left, so we can stick around, but that is what we have for you today. I am about to end the poll, so if you have not finished responding to that, please do. Thank you so much for coming. Your attendance and participation were so appreciated. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Daryl, thanks for putting what company you were with, because it was kind of confusing not knowing where everyone was from.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You sure look familiar, because I was in
Yeah, I used to come to Street Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The groups.
To which group? At Maple Street or to Street Life?
To Lee. Aren't you with Lee?
Yeah, I am at league with Danny Hayes.
Okay, okay. All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Just want to give a few more seconds in case folks are sticking around for questions, but if not, we can end the call. Thank you so much, Rachel and Ivy. All your effort is so appreciated. Thank you so much.
I had fun.
Thanks, Sarah.
doing it. I
Thanks,
enjoyed it.
Vanessa.
Rachel, I got your forms. Thank you for sending that.
Did I get it right?
I haven't had a chance to look, but I'll email you if something needs editing. And Ivy, if you want to also get me your form sent by the end of this week, then I can get that process together for both of you.
I'm gonna try and figure out how to print them out unless there's a way to electronically fill them.
You can electronically fill it out.
What you were able to?
Yeah. Just,
Oh,
do
okay.
you have a
I'll try
Google
and do
Drive?
that. Google Drive?
Do you save things to Google Drive? Or do you have like Adobe
try.
PDF reader?
I don't know. I'll try. I always stumble through it. I never know what program to open it with, but I'll try.
Okay. Let me know if you need any help with that.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'll see you guys on the 15th, a week from Monday, to talk about the next training.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Did you send an invite for that so I can add it to my calendar?
I did. It doesn't show which email. Oh, I sent it to Ivy Clark 1577 at Gmail. Do you want me to send it to
For some reason, I don't have that on my calendar, but I'll add it right now.
Okay, it's April 15th at 2 p.m.
Okay.
I'll send the Zoom link and everything too, because it has a Zoom link in it. So
Okay, it's easier to save into my calendar so I can link to it. But thank you guys for being part of the training. We'll see you next month if you're part of it.
Thank you, ladies. Enjoy your day.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll see you on the 15th.